Welcome back. This is Nader's Nemesis 2.0, and this will be video number 8. As I mentioned in the last video, I want to show you the work that I've done on setting the body on top of the chassis, and then some of the work that I've done to make sure that I've got room for wheels and tires in the fenders. So a lot to show you, so let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see, the chassis is now installed into the body. What I did is took the chassis off the jig and made notes on the chassis of where the center line was for the chassis front to back, and then axle center lines both front and rear, and did the same to the body. And then lifted the body up with a hoist, and with the help of my wife and my neighbor George, we were able to line the chassis up underneath the body and lowered it right down on top of the chassis. And everything lined right up. I had no issues at all. It was kind of a tedious job of inching things back and forth, but was able to get it done. Once that body was on the chassis, that gave me the opportunity then to weld the rocker panels onto the 2x3 outer frame rails, and then also install the door bars as a part of the 8-point roll bar. So that all went in very well and got installed. All the measurements around the engine, headers, exhaust, all worked out well, and I've even gotten the remote oil tank installed for the LS7, so that's in place and welded into that position. So everything's lining up pretty well. There were really no surprises. I had to do some adjusting with some of the leftover sheet metal in the trunk area that I had to cut out. Didn't have quite enough clearance room to get the arms up from the chassis. But it lined up pretty well and actually went pretty smooth. I then, after I got the rocker panel welded in, then I worked on connecting the front part of the chassis to the bumper support on both sides. So I've got that in place. I decided to go wide with those to create enough room for the radiator. So there's radiators on order, but I'll get that installed into the center spot. And the inner fender wells were pretty much in place. I did have to make some cuts and alter the size of the inner fender wells because of the size of the tires. You can see I patched in some additional metal on the inside, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But that lined up really well. Didn't have any big issues in doing that. And the same held out for the rear part of this. I connected the frame rails to the bumper support and got those in place. The exhaust travels underneath the airbox without any interference at all. And so that all really went pretty well. With the chassis welded into the body, that gave me a chance to then do some more detail work on getting the wheels and tires and fenders to match up well. As you can see, I've got a fiberglass wheel well opening from Clark's Corvair Parts installed on this. On the fronts, I had to put that wheel well on the outside to give just a little bit more clearance. So that's been resined in place, fiberglass and resined in place. And I will be doing some blending of that fiberglass piece into the current bodywork. But it'll retain the same look for the fender. It'll be oval shaped, and it'll have the 3/4 inch ridge all the way around the opening as the stock Corvair does. The inner fender wells, as I mentioned, had to be modified quite a bit to create some clearance for both travel up into the fender well, and then once the wheel is all the way up into the fender well, there's room for it to turn back and forth. So that's all clearanced out, and it fits nice. The rear had to do the same thing. I was able to fasten the fiberglass wheel well opening to the inside of the quarter panel. I had to use 2 of those fiberglass panels because I had to make it wider. And that's what this splice is right here. I used 2 to get more length, and then I had to splice it to get more height out of it as well too, because the opening is quite a bit bigger. The patch panel in back is installed and blended, and it'll all be blended in with some body work. That'll be later on after I've got all the other stuff done. On the rear, I put 30-inch wheel tubs in place, built out bracketry for those wheel tubs, and they'll be fastened to the outer fender to create some rigidity to that. So that'll be coming up a little bit later, but they're in place, and they look good, and they'll do a fine job of maintaining debris that flies up from the tires, but all fitting pretty well. I also have installed the Ride Tech coilover shocks that were made and designed by Rick Dobberton for his adapters. They're a kit that you can order. They're part numbers that Rick provides on his website. So I bought the rear and the fronts, and picked some springs that were a bit of a guess on the weight. We'll have to see whether those are going to be right once we get everything put into the body, or into the chassis and car. But so far it looks good, and it lines up really well. I'm going to add some pictures you'll see in this video of the car sitting on the ground at ride height, and in the stance that it has with the tires in the wheel wells, and it looks the way I had hoped it would, and the way I measured it all out. We'll see once I have all the weight built into the car with the fuel cell and the radiator and all the interior parts, the transaxle, and then I can make some adjustments with the spring perches. And if I have to, I'll change the springs out to a different spring rate to get the correct ride height. But I'll add some pictures in the video for that. The other thing I wanted to mention is the next thing on my agenda is to start working on the firewall. As you can see, you got a big opening here, and I need to get that closed up, connected to the inner fender wells and to what's left of the firewall. So I've got some work to start doing that, piecing in that. And at the same time I'm doing that, I'll be making provisions for this vintage air AC units and heating units. It's the Mini Gen 2 version with defrost. So I'll be building out that firewall so this can be installed, and all the heater lines, or all the air lines, and Freon / heater core lines can all be run. So it'll be some tedious work, but it's kind of nice working from scratch, and I can design the way that works. So stay tuned for that on the next video, and hopefully that will be something I can show you. Okay, that's all for this update. I appreciate all the comments that you've passed along, and like I said before, I do read them all and give them some consideration if there's maybe some things I could do differently or hadn't thought about. So I do appreciate that. Stay tuned and look for the next update in a month or so. Thank you.